Not a path to fame, not a path to fortune, not a path to success. Most people fail, and it's miserable. Hello, hello, hello. I am John Beckman, Professor John Beckman, Dr. John Beckman, coming to you live from Southern Command with half my breakdown behind my back, just to make it fair. Documented to be correct almost 99.9% of the time. All right, this is Technical Discussions 026. I have to give this talk all the time to potential students who are applying for a PhD or even sometimes a master's. So I want to get this talk archived just so I can quick forward it to people. And other people might find this interesting. So the topic is, what is a PhD? And is a PhD right for you? I would encourage you not to follow me, not to take my advice on anything. But if you're curious, my X is Stampede Press, Professor Beckman, and you can follow my videos on Rumble and YouTube. I'm going to be pushing Rumble a lot more in the near future. All right, take a look at this comic. Line from Ursula. It's happened once or twice. Someone couldn't pay the price, and I'm afraid I had to rake them across the coals. I show you this comic today because a lot of people get into the situation of thinking the PhD is for them, and it doesn't work out well. They get raked across the coals. So I actually created a map that I show to all my students, and I give this walkthrough anytime I'm going to seriously consider somebody for a PhD position. So we'll talk about, this is like the path of the PhD. And we'll also talk about like, what is a PhD? What's the purpose of a PhD? So what is a PhD? It's a research degree. That's the biggest misconception that people have, is people think it's, if they're intelligent and if they've done well in school, they could naturally get a PhD. That's not my experience. It's not a classical book knowledge degree. So people think that the PhD is, well, you learned about a bunch of facts, learned a bunch of knowledge, and then you graduate. No, that's not what it is. It's not about taking classes, memorizing factoids, and getting good grades. That's not what a PhD is. A PhD is a research degree. So you are training in how to do research. That's the biggest misconception, and that's where I find where you get the wrong types of people. Do not come to this degree if you are thinking of just getting through the system and getting a piece of paper that certifies you as being intelligent. Do not do that. If you want something like that, go to MD, get an MD, medical doctor, become a lawyer, become a dentist. You really should not be doing a PhD unless you are actually interested in research. And research is a very painful process. So you need to understand that. Okay, and then the classical warnings that I always give everybody. Like, I warn people not to get a PhD. Do not get a PhD. Warnings. You will not make money. Okay, PhD is not a degree where you're going to make money. Again, if you want to have a nice life where you're making a lot of money, get a professional degree. That's the way if you want a nice life where you can go on vacations, go to the beach, and have a very high standard of living. You will not be respected. Do not get a PhD if you want to be respected. Again, if you want to be respected, become a medical doctor or a dentist or a lawyer, some other path. Okay, PhD, nobody respects people with PhD. So you should need to understand that. Excuse me, this one is very cynical. Do not get a PhD. Well, what I was going to say, don't get a PhD if you want to become a professor. You have to get a PhD if you do want to become a professor. But a professor is not the greatest life. Trust me. Take my word for it. And what you need to understand, the reason I write this, I mean, it's kind of paradoxical because you need a PhD to become a professor, but don't get a PhD assuming you will become a professor because the attrition rate is extremely high in this field. Okay. Typically, to become a professor, you get your PhD. Okay. And I don't know what the attrition rates of PhDs are, but at maximum, it's probably 50%. Okay. Then the next step. So essentially 50% of people who are trying to get their PhDs probably drop out of the program or go insane. PhD literally drives people to insanity. So there's a high attrition rate. Then after that, you usually have to do what's called a postdoc. Postdoc is essentially, you have your PhD, you've been trained in research, and now like it's your time to shine. It's your time to show the world what you can do, what you can discover with your research degree. And 1 out of 10 postdocs become professors. So the attrition rate of postdoc to professor is 90%. So again, what you need to understand about becoming a professor is it's an extremely high attrition rate, extremely low rate of success, high chance of failure. Okay. So don't get a PhD because you want to become a professor. Unless like for me, I mean, did I really actually think I wanted to be a professor? I no, like I never thought that. I just sort of here I am. Okay, the only reasons you should consider yourself as possibly qualified or interested in the PhD is because you like research, okay? And you have ideas. So again, another big problem that I get with students who think the PhD is right for them. And some people end up with PhDs, but the PhD was really not right for them. The big problem is oftentimes it's hard to find people who have their own ideas. So don't get a PhD if you want people to tell you what to do. Okay, PhD is very lonely. It's a very lonely process. It's expected that you are a type of person who has ideas that you're excited about, that you have enough internal motivation that you want to explore those ideas, those research questions. Okay. So if you like research and if you actually are a person that has your own ideas, you need to be very honest about this. You need to look at yourself in the face and ask yourself, have I ever had an idea that was worth pursuing, that I actually pursued? If the answer is no, do not get a PhD. Only get a PhD if you like research. That means you have questions about how the world works or some niche topic that you find really interesting. You could read 100 books about that and keep going. Okay. If you have questions like that and you're interested enough to formulate hypotheses. So you have a question, you think, well, I don't know how this works, but maybe it's this, or maybe it's this. And my hypothesis is that it's this. And then you can actually formulate scientific methodologies to test those hypotheses through experiments. That's what a PhD is. Okay. It's training in how to test your ideas. So don't even think about getting a PhD if you don't even have ideas and you don't have the internal motivation to do it yourself and test those ideas. So if you like research, if you like doing that stuff, even if you like research, it's probably better for you to not get a PhD because you could probably do your own research now on the internet, start a company. Maybe you'd be more likely to become successful that way. Okay. So I really advise people, really most people, PhD is not right for you. Okay. Not a path to fame, not a path to fortune, not a path to success. Most people fail and it's miserable. Other things that I always tell people about the PhD. So more warnings. A PhD is a degree in failure. So when I hire research students, I tell them your failure rate should be about 90% in experiments. So that means every day you come to work, week after week after week, you will do things in the lab that seem like complete waste of time because you'll do an experiment and the result will fail or it will be inconclusive. You can't make a conclusion because it didn't work. And you have to figure out, well, why didn't my experiment work? Or how do I do the experiment in a way where I can actually get data that has some meaning, okay? 90% of what you do will be a waste of time. And you'll get through your entire PhD and then you'll realize, oh, I finally figured out how to do it in the last 6 months. And that's what that's what allowed you to graduate with your PhD. You finally figured it out, okay? So it's a degree in failure. So if you're not an optimistic person who really, again, wants to do this, you're not going to make it through that. And this will drive people insane. If you look at and you study the statistics of insanity, madness, psychosis, mental health problems, they're much higher in the academic community because we train people on how to fail. And that is hard for people, very hard for people. So you need to have internal fortitude. More warnings. It's lonely. When you get a PhD, you are being asked to become an expert on something that nobody else knows. So people come into the program and again, they want people to tell them how to do it. They want their advisor to tell them how to do the experiment. They want their advisor to tell them the answer. They want the professor to tell them how it works. Well, I don't know how it works. Again, that's what you're being hired to figure out. You're being hired to figure out how something works. And so there's nobody really that you can go to for advice. You can you talk to lots of people and you network with people and you learn about what their expertise are. And so you build a network of people who maybe this person has this skill, this person has this skill. And if I combine those, maybe I can figure out my problem. That can happen. But you will never find a person that will know the answers to your questions. You have to figure it out through hard work and labor and experiments in the lab, at the bench. That's what the PhD is. No one can help you but yourself. Okay. Most people, this is not right for you. Okay. Go home. Or you might envision this as if you watch the early Jackie Chan Drunken Master videos. the first one, he goes to the master and he wants to learn from the master. And the master says, no, you're not qualified. Get out of here. And that's sort of like a test that if you take no for an answer, you'll fail. It's a 5 to 7 year route of failure. So you can't take no for an answer. If you take no for an answer, no means no. If you take no for an answer, PhD is not right for you. Okay. I say these things in jest, but there is some truth. So I give all my students many, many, many warnings. Don't get the PhD unless you really thought through this. And the only reasons to get a PhD are if you like research and if you actually have ideas that you want to test. Okay. All right. This is the map that I show people, state diagram of what the PhD is, the tasks that you need to accomplish during the PhD, and how to get through the process and succeed. Okay. This is the way. This is the map for how to get a PhD. Epsilon, this is the beginning. This is the entrance of the state diagram. So you enter here before you apply to a program. Okay, so imagine you had thought all this through. Yes, PhD is right for you. You got a couple areas that you like to do research on. You got a couple programs you want to apply to. Okay, before you apply for a grant. You cannot succeed in the PhD or in academia if nobody else values your ideas. So you have to be able to be a person who can generate outsider buy-in into your ideas. If you can't do that, you'll never have an idea. You might have one idea, but maybe that's something only you can do by yourself. You have to be able to generate outsider buy-in. Okay. So you need experience writing grants. And so the best thing that you can do before you start a PhD is to actually take a research idea and apply for a grant. And you can talk to a professor if you're thinking about the program, and every professor will be like, sure, I'll help you write a grant because, that could be money for that professor. So that's usually one way to get your foot in the door. Like, let me help you write a grant. Let's write a grant together. Let's think of a research idea. If we can get it funded, that'd be a great scenario to start your PhD, funding right away. Or even if you fail, again, that's the PhD, failure. So you learn by failure. And so the more grants you fail at, the more likely you are to succeed at getting one later. So start by applying for a grant. Okay. Once you've done that, then apply to the program. So all PhDs, you're going to have to take the GRE. You're going to have to take some standardized test. You're going to have to talk with a professor or the graduate program officer, the GPO. You apply to the program and you say, oh, I kind of want to work with this person or this person or this person. Or often there's like a rotation. You have to apply to the program. Okay. So then you actually have to apply to the program. You have to get in. There's going to be some kind of selection committee, or perhaps a professor is analyzing you in comparison to a few other students, and you got to meet that cut. So you got to get into the program. Okay. Then once you're in, nothing's guaranteed. Okay. People get fired all the time, and I wish it was easier for us to fire people even faster. The weird thing about the PhD and the professor relationship, the student and the professor relationship, is that it's a mentorship relationship. So while I would like it to be a little bit more cutthroat, and it is in fact pretty cutthroat, it's often a mentorship relationship. So it's our job to sort of help guide you through the path. That's the role of the advisor. So you want to think about that as you try to think about who's going to be your advisor. This is somebody that you're going to have to work with for multiple years, 5 years or more. You have to be able to get along with them. You have to be able to trust them, and you have to take their advice. And so oftentimes we cannot just get rid of people immediately, because it's often like, well, I hope we can push you in the right direction. So kind of be aware of that understanding of the relationship between graduate student and professor. Okay. Then once you get into the program, you're going to need to have what's an initial sort of meeting, sort of like planning your classes. So every graduate program is going to have a set of core classes and then electives. So classes are a part of the PhD. It is a part of the program. It's this part of the program. It's this much. So essentially classes are this much of the whole PhD process. So again, this is an illustration that can help you understand how significant classes are. And the fact is that they're not significant to the PhD. I mean, it's a tiny part of the whole process. So don't think that you just take classes, you get your degree. That's not how it works. Okay. But you still do have to take classes. You have to do well in those classes. Otherwise, they'll fail you out of the program. So you plan out your course curriculum. And usually the first 2 years of your PhD, you're taking classes periodically. Take a couple classes here or there to get them out of the way, to get them done. Okay. So you need to take those core classes. You need to get at least Bs. These are graduate level classes. The good news is that oftentimes the graduate level classes are actually sometimes easier than the undergraduate classes. I've taken many, many, many classes. Hundreds, actually, I've taken hundreds of university classes at this point. And many actually of the weed out classes are harder than graduate school classes. So keep that in mind. It's not hard to get Bs if you're above a certain level IQ. That should not be the hard part, okay? Then you finish your classes. You want to get those out of the way as quick as possible so you can focus on the research, okay? So you get the classes out of the way. And if you survive, you get at least Bs, you retain that knowledge from those classes. Now you're sort of like entering the rest of the navigation of the process. Okay. So simultaneously, as you're taking class, you have to begin research. Okay. So that's this segue here. So you're entering the program, you're starting to take classes. You also need to simultaneously do research. So another warning, more warnings. If you can't multitask, do not get the PhD. And this is going to require a ton of labor because taking classes, doing well in classes is not hard, but it takes labor. It takes reading, it takes effort. And doing research at the same time takes up a lot of time. So if you have other hobbies, don't get the PhD. I tell people that the PhD is a time where you cut out everything else out of your life and you focus your life on a topic. That's what it is. Okay. When I was a PhD student, and mostly when I was a postdoc student, I cut out all my hobbies. I stopped doing art as a postdoc. I cut all that out in focus of research on one specific topic. That's what it is. So if you have hobbies, don't get the PhD. Okay. As you start to do research, again, it's going to be your job to think of, well, what is my research question? How can I start testing it? So it's good for you to create a list of thesis ideas or dissertation ideas. Master's is thesis, dissertation is PhD. Okay. So you want to create a list of these are the topics that I want to research. And you're not going to be able to decide right away which one is the one that's going to become your dissertation. Okay. But the earliest thing you need to do is to start creating a list of those ideas that you want to explore. Once you have a list of those ideas, and through conversations with your mentor, they will be able to help you hone down that list, telling you what are the bad ideas, what are the feasible ideas, okay? And then you'll be able to pick a subject that you can start doing research on. Then the next thing you need to do is you need to do what's called a literature review. So you don't ever want to spend 5 years of your life doing experiments on something that has already been tested, okay? It's often important to reproduce experiments. It's often important to do things again because we don't necessarily trust all the old literature, but you don't want to be naive and ignorant of everything else that has been done in the past. Although there are mixed feelings about this. So just a caution here. Again, everything in PhD is very paradoxical. The Wright brothers, they did a literature review on flying, and this is in the book, a book on how they invented flying or how they invented planes. And they did a whole literature review and they said, all these people are entirely idiots. And then they went their own way and ignored everything else. So again, everything in PhD is paradoxical. You need to understand that you should be willing to discard everything that's been written about some particular subject as complete bullshit to test your own idea. That is the type of person that is right for the PhD. Crazy enough to discard the entire literature to pursue their own idea. That's somebody who, I'd be excited to have in my lab. Okay. But you don't want to be naive. You want to read about what's been written on a particular subject. You want to read everything or as much as you can on it. And you want to be able to discern who are the smart people, who are the dumb people. In every field, there's a ton of dumb people and a few smart people who know what they're talking about. So you want to read the whole literature and find those people who are sort of the real people who know what they're talking about in a field. Okay. That's the literature review. And that will usually become your chapter 1 of your dissertation. So you write a chapter, which is like a book chapter, a book report of here's everything that's been written on a particular subject. Here's who's right, here's who's wrong, here's what we need to test next, why, etc. That's the literature review. Okay. So now you're starting to mature a little bit in the research process as you're taking your classes. And part of the PhD is learning, getting comfortable with reading the primary literature, the actual research articles, interpreting data, understanding data, and being able to make conclusions about who's right and who's wrong. And that's what the classes are supposed to help you with. The classes are supposed to arm you with content that can help you discern which of the literature is correct and which of the literature is wrong. And I would say about 50 to 90% of all research articles that are written are total bullshit. So you need to understand that. Okay. And this is what I mean by next step is sort of analyzing data in the thesis. And data comes from two sources. Data comes from literature reviews of what other people have written. That's half of where data comes from. And simultaneously, you should now start doing experiments. So there's sort of a three-pronged thing that you need to start doing in this PhD state diagram. You need to be taking classes, you need to be doing experiments every day, your own experiments in the lab, and you need to be reading what other people are doing. Those are three sources of information. Okay. So what I tell people is if you're in the lab, you should try to do at least one experiment a day. This is sort of molecular biology specific. In molecular biology, we can go into the lab, we can do one experiment every day. That's easy to accomplish. And later you'll be doing multiple experiments every day if you're any good. If you're in ecology or if you're doing sort of like field research, it's a little bit more difficult to do one experiment every day. But the main point is you need to immediately, as fast as possible, start doing experiments. Okay, that's where you have a hypothesis, you figure out a way to test the hypothesis, you do the work, you get the data, formulate a conclusion, rinse and repeat. And that's why this has an arrow of back to itself. Keep doing this over and over and over, over and over and over. And you will eventually acquire some data that is meaningful if you keep doing that. Okay. So what I tell people is if you're actually doing what you're being asked to do, you should be able to assemble at least one complete figure each semester. So one complete figure means you've done a ton of experiments. You know which experiments are actually working, which experiments are not working because of the controls, because of the data. And that will allow you to assemble a complete figure of data each semester. And from that figure, you can usually reach one or a few conclusions, which lead you to the next experiment. Okay. And so that data that you're acquiring funnels into analyzing data and incorporating that into your thesis. So once you've completed your chapter 1, which is the literature review, now you're in chapter 2 where you're actually doing experiments, you're analyzing your experiments in your thesis, talking about them, talking about the conclusions. Each experiment is giving you a tiny piece of data that's leading you to the next experiment, which is the next thing that you need to do, which is why you cannot go to your professor and say, well, what's the next thing I need to do, and expect them to tell you what to do. Because the only way for you to know what to do next is by looking at the data that you acquired. And the professor can help you analyze what's next or what would be a good strategy as to what's next. But it would be entirely dependent upon your data. Okay. And so once you are acquiring data, you're probably now, 1/3 through the PhD process. Okay. Acquiring what we would call preliminary data. Preliminary data is the concept that your early experiments are not going to be done the best. You're not going to know precisely the best way to do the experiment. And you might get some hints about what the truth is, but you don't know. You're learning how to do the experiments. Okay. And so preliminary data gives you the hint of what might be true. And that's often what leads you, again, guides your path. Where are you actually seeing some positive preliminary data? And if you have some positive preliminary data, now is another time to write a grant. So most grants that are likely to get funded have a significant amount of work that's already been done. People have already worked for 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years on many of these grants that have already been funded. They've collected a ton of preliminary data. They know what's working, what's not working because they've done the work. Okay. So that's a great time to write a grant because it's more likely to get funded if you have a ton of preliminary data. Now, again, this state diagram is not necessarily like temporal. Like you should follow it in the state, but all these things should be happening simultaneously. You should be multitasking. So you should also be now forming your committee. Your committee is a panel of professors who have a panel of skills and knowledge that can help guide your PhD quest. Okay. So if you're doing molecular biology, maybe you want a geneticist, maybe you want a biochemist, and maybe you want an ecologist, because maybe you want to pool all these people's knowledge to help guide you in the right direction. That's what your committee should be. It should be a panel of professors that you respect, that you think are smart, that you think have the knowledge to guide you to help you succeed in your project. And it's not a guarantee. If you fail, that's on you. So you form your committee, which means you ask those professors, will you be on my committee? Once you have formed a committee, you have a first committee meeting, which is you assemble all the professors together. And they talk about your degree program. They talk about your research plan. They talk about problems. They talk about potential experiments you need to do. They talk about classes you need to take, essentially are guiding your path on this state diagram. And then once they approve, it's sort of like the verbal, like, okay, you've been given the go ahead. Okay. Now you should have a few committee meetings each time you have a significant like update on experimental data or something happens. You need to have a committee meeting to sort of get people back together to see where you're at. So you'll have a few of these committee meetings. And eventually, you'll come to what's called the preliminary qualifying exam. So when you're about halfway through the PhD, you will have to have an exam. Every program does this slightly different, but every program has some sort of qualifying exam. So usually this is constituted of an oral defense, a written defense, or you might not call this a defense. Some people call it different words at this time. It might be an exam, an oral exam, written exam, and then a seminar. So usually you come before the department, you give your seminar, you talk about what you've been doing, you talk about your research plan, then you go into a meeting with your committee, and they will ask you any question that they want to ask you, okay? And you need to demonstrate your competence in the field, the classes that you took. You need to demonstrate that you are an expert in that. Not only that, but are you an expert now in the research field that you are investigating, okay? So this is a defense, and this is a strategic fail point. So this is where the committee decides, does this person actually have what it takes to go through the rest of the process? You're not even halfway done yet. Does this person have what it takes to actually get a PhD? And is this person going to reflect well on the department in that, are they going to be actually become an independent researcher? Okay. And if you do not pass these exams with the approval of your committee, then that's a failure point. They'll kick you out of the program. So you need to pass this. So oftentimes this requires intensive study for a period. In theory, you've been studying for years now because you've been taking classes and you've been reading papers. Oftentimes people put that off and then they fail, right? Once you pass your prelims, okay, you are now what's called a PhD candidate. You have now been determined by the department to be a candidate who might be worthy of the PhD degree. Okay. At this point, I advise people it's a good idea after you pass your prelims to take a small vacation. So you may have been working for 2 to 3 years now with no vacation. I advise people after you pass your prelims, you should take a small vacation. Again, I think you earn your vacation. I don't think you go home every winter break to a different country. I don't think you do that. Okay, I think you earn your vacations. And once you have done something good, or publish a paper or pass your prelim, then you take a small vacation. Okay. Now, simultaneously, as you're doing these things, as you're collecting data, data naturally leads to publications. So once you take something that was preliminary data and you move it to real, respectable, professional, peer-reviewed data, you're going to start to assemble publications, okay? So published papers get first authorships. So that's what these are. And I have 2 different sort of categories of publication. A first authorship is the most valuable commodity to a PhD doctor. It's essentially a paper that you devised. You thought of the hypothesis, you thought of the question, you did the work, you wrote the paper, you did the literature review, you collected the data, you analyzed the data, you wrote the paper, you submitted it. Your advisor probably helped guide you along the path, talked with you a lot about the research, 1 week or 1 meeting per week usually, and helped you write the paper, helped teach you how to write so that it was more likely to get that passed through peer review, okay? That's what a first authorship is. Essentially, you did everything. That's what earning a first authorship is. That's why your name goes first. You should have, by the time you finish the PhD, I mean, you should have definitely like a few of these, okay? Because each one of these is demonstrating you are actually capable of independent research. And usually these first authorships often spawn collaborations. So they often spawn little other, what are called minor authorships. So you'll see on PhD papers, there are many, many authors. Sometimes you might be in conversations or in collaboration with somebody else, and they might need some particular technique. So you might collaborate a little bit with another person. You might help them do a particular technique. And that might get you what's called a minor authorship, a middle authorship on those papers. And so collecting middle authorships are demonstrating your capacity to collaborate, build teams, and work with other people towards a larger research project. Okay? So to graduate with a PhD, the number is dependent on different fields and dependent on the success of the student. In some fields, some PhDs culminate in 1 publication that's taken 5 to 7 years. That sometimes happens. And sometimes that paper is monumentally good. And sometimes that paper is not very good. Other times, sometimes people are just animals. They figure out how to get it done. And they just love it. And they do a ton of research. And they get many, many, many publications. So you'll see a vast diversity of how many publications people are getting. And, you know, this is a big debate within the field, quality versus quantity. And I'm not the person who's going to settle that debate, but you want a good medium of both. You know, you want really, really, really good monumental papers that take a lot of work, that are paradigm changing. And you want a few, you know, smaller papers where you're maybe just building a technique. You're demonstrating to people what you can do. You're demonstrating your techniques. You're tackling a tiny problem, and that might get you a small paper. Okay. But the papers are the commodity of research. Okay. And first authorships are the demonstration that you're capable of doing independent. So you cannot get a PhD if you don't have first authorships. Once you have a certain amount of publications, you have now started to build your resume and people start to respect you a little bit more. So at this time, it's good to write another grant. This is typically a grant where, so you're probably now 2/3 through the program. You got a couple publications under your belt and you're starting to think about, well, what's next? Like, what am I going to do next? And oftentimes that's a good time to take what you have, synthesize it into a grant and submit a grant for where you might go next. And if you get positive feedback from the grant review panels, that might be an indication that you should stay in the game. Okay. And again, I guess I made it to being a professor, and here I am, tenured associate professor. But for me, I'm always just kind of, one grant away from death. I live to fight another day. And that's the way that you should see the research career is you're essentially one grant away from losing your career for the rest of your career. Small chance of success, small chance of survival, but a great adventure. Okay, now what needs to happen is you need to start accumulating your dissertation. Hopefully you have been accumulating your dissertation over many, many, many of the years that you have been in the program. So you need to be starting to accumulate your chapters. And each time you finish a chapter, you should be sending that to your advisor periodically. So what you should not do, please don't do this. It's a recipe for getting failed, is to all of a sudden assemble your dissertation or your thesis like the week before your defense and send it to your professor. That's a recipe to get failed, and those people deserve to get failed. Oftentimes, they don't get failed for political reasons. There's a lot of conflicts of interest in this entire process that I won't go into now, but please don't do that. You should be periodically sending your advisor your thesis and your dissertation, and you should be having conversations about how to fix that, how to repair that, how to edit that, so that by the time you come to your defense, you are ready and have a very clean dissertation. That's beautiful. That's reflective of a hard worker who knows how to do the work, who is deserving of the PhD. Okay. And you probably have a few committee meetings to determine whether or not you are ready for your defense. Now, here is the final decision point of the PhD process. You're at the end. You send your final dissertation to your thesis committee. You schedule a committee meeting, and your advisors are provided usually about a month at least to read through your dissertation, to look at the data, to figure out what do they have problems with, what do they not have problems with. And then you have what's called the defense. The defense is sort of a second iteration of the oral exam, but more rigorous. So you have a seminar for the department. You then go into a back room where all the professors can ask you anything they want to ask you, anything about any subject, okay? It could be politics, it could be your data. Usually what it's going to be about is your data, your methods, your research topic, your field of work, the history of the field of work that you're working in, the literature within the context that sets your research, and most importantly, your research, okay? And that is the biggest event. And if you pass, so there's a vote at the end, if you pass, and it's essentially, it needs to be a 100% consistent vote. People can get passed with reservations, or you can get, so essentially like any professor can say, I'm not going to pass them until they do this. And usually that is how it works, okay? So there's a vote that determines whether or not you pass the defense. And then after you pass the defense, okay, you got your degree in hand, you have your PhD, and now what do you do with it? If you monsters, who knows? That's up to you. And so you hope that you come out of the PhD with something that you really felt was valuable, something that you was worth spending your time on. That's your hope. That's not a guarantee. So that is what a PhD is. This is the way. This is not the way for most people. Okay. So keep that in mind. Good luck.
I am Wolf, son of Moog. I have much to teach you about women. Notice how the Klingon wears a mate. Klingons do not pursue relationships. They conquer that which they desire. Today, I am a warrior. I must show you my heart. I travel the river of blood. much to teach you about women. That is how the Klingon lures a mate. Klingons do not pursue relationships. They conquer that which they desire. Today, I'm a warrior. I must show you my heart. I travel the river of blood. I am a Klingon. Doubted. A demonstration can be arranged. I am a Klingon. Doubted. A demonstration can be arranged. I am a Klingon. Doubted. A demonstration can be arranged. I am a Klingon. Doubted. A demonstration can be arranged. Earth females are too fragile. It is a good day to die.
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 I am Worf, son of Mo. I have much to teach you about women. That is how the Klingon lures a mate. Klingons do not pursue relationships. They conquer that which they desire. Today, I'm a warrior. I must show you my heart. I travel the river of blood.